Primus Tracks with Josh and Frankie.
What a couple of dumb shits.
It was a if I had shot my breath, I was looking for something to see.
Hello, Primates, Primus fans, old and new. Primus fans wearing face masks that you might have bought from Primus. Primus fans not wearing face masks. You're all welcome. You found Primus Tracks. Congratulations. I'm Josh, and right over there wearing his mask is Frankie.
Hey, Josh.
You don't even sound muddled through your mask. That must be some fabric you've got there. We are at Primus Tracks on Instagram and Twitter. We're having a great time on Instagram, so come on over. And as a reminder, you can leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcast, and we would gladly read it right here on this very program. It is a big, monumental episode for us for a couple of reasons. One, we are wrapping up Frizzle Fry, which I can't even believe we're doing already. and we are taking on a huge track as far as length of time, but also live performances and just the mystery or the mystique surrounding this track. So today we're taking on Frizzle Fry, track 12, Herald of the Rocks, and very briefly, I believe, we'll touch on track 13, to Defy. Herald of the Rocks is definitely our focus today. Frankie, Herald of the Rocks, where do you even start?
Wow, as you said, Josh, it's a monumental track. It's a bona fide Primus classic. It's a showstopper at any concert. It's a track with a ton of back history and trivia behind it. You know, as much as I love Pudding Time and Mr. Know-It-All and Groundhog's Day as well, I think Herald of the Rocks is definitely the centerpiece of Frizzle Fry.
Wow, big words. As you said, we just have all these slamming tracks from beginning to end. But it really is, and I would agree with you, it really is a standout track. It's quite unique. It can really only come from the voices of Primus. Of course, it started with the Sausage demo with Jay, Todd, and Les, and then we have the lineup change, but this tune didn't change too much, but we'll definitely get into the nitty-gritty about that. I do want to start by saying, and I don't know if you've experienced this, Frankie, but you wouldn't believe how many people at Primus shows I will overhear saying, oh, I want them to play this song, and they're talking about Herald of the Rocks, but they say Herald's on the Rocks as the title of the track. I'm like, what a bunch of weirdos. Herald's on the Rocks. Like, are they, do they think they're talking about ice cubes? I really hope not, you know. But, and I don't make fun of them or anything. It's just funny to hear how people say Primus titles or interpret anything, you know, because people hear what they hear. I used to be kind of a gatekeeper in that regard as a teenager, but then I started just letting people have it. Say what you're going to say. It's fine. You appreciate the music too. That's great. When I was in high school at soccer practice one day, I was talking to somebody about Weird Al Yankovic was coming to town. I said, I'm going to go to the concert next week, the Weird Al concert. And this guy said, oh, you mean Crazy Al Yankovic? We made fun of him because he didn't know the name. And I should have just said, yeah, Weird Al. But I made fun of this guy. So, Justin, I'm so sorry for 25 years ago making fun of you for not knowing Weird Al Yankovic's name.
I had a similar experience. I was at a Primus show in LA. A couple of guys behind me were talking about the songs they wanted to hear. And one of them said that he was really hoping they would play Soda Pop. And I mean, to this day, I have no idea if he was hoping to hear Pork Soda or Antipop.
Or maybe a weird mashup that he saw on YouTube. Yes. Who knows? That we as humans can mangle our own language in our own lexicon and not be able to understand each other, even in something, this little microcosm as a Primus show. It's so funny. As with all Frizzle Fry tracks, there are dozens of live performances without documented set lists in the late 80s, early 90s. Herald had to have been a staple track at that time. If you look at Toasterland, it checks in with exactly 400 live performances, which makes it the 12th most common Primus track ever played live. Although I would imagine it's closer to the top 5, given that we have all those dates without set lists. And I've gotten Herald 5 times in my 20-plus Primus/Claypool experiences. And you pointed to it earlier. It never fails to be a crowd pleaser. You called it a showstopper. Sometimes it's a show opener. I've gotten it to open a show before, which is unusual given that it's the album closer. So it might seem strange for it to appear all over the set list. But like I said, I've seen it open with it. I've seen it in the middle of the show. I've seen it near the end of the show. It's really interesting as an opener because it has so many disparate parts and really has this lounging middle part. It can really help be a build up for the crowd to really get into the rest of the set. In its placement, it can be very interesting itself.
And it's one of those tracks that involve the crowd in the song. I haven't been at a single Primus show where the whole collective audience doesn't sing along to these guys are pretty bizarre Gus part.
It's tailor-made for that. It was so fun to go back through this track and make a list of the opportunities for the crowd to really get into it and yell along. When he's introducing the track and thumping and plucking the bass and yelling, "Well!" the crowd knows what's coming, so they're going to scream well too. Right after that, that's when the "What Was It" guy, that's when he gets his due, because people still yell that to this day, as I said before. And I'm going to say it again, the "What Was It" guy, maybe Soya knows, and I need to go back and ask him, because if we know who the "What Was It" guy is, who they are, I would like to talk to them. And then his name is Harold part in the middle of that riff. This guy's pretty bizarre Gus. That's the last to seen of Harold. People love that line. And then, of course, everybody's favorite. You heard it at the start of the show. What a couple of dumb shits. People love that one, too. And that one gets delivered in myriad different ways. Great opportunities for the crowd to be screaming along. And this track in general, too, with that extended bluesy middle and that quality guitar work, we just get more of a showcase for the range of this band and what they're capable of. And it's just a fascinating track.
My personal perspective, when I witness Harold of the Rocks live or when I listen to live recordings, I've always thought that Larry's guitar work on Harold of the Rocks sounds a lot like David Gilmour. I mean, it's just that the way that he plays on this track, particularly during the breakdown, it's like really evocative, really melodic, particularly during Fromage and Hallucinogenetics, when he was sort of doing something different every night during the breakdown. And, nowadays they have kind of returned to the way the track is on Frizzle Fry. It's a little shorter than it used to be, although they are still improvising a bit. I think it's still one of the biggest opportunities on the set list for Larry to show off his skills and his incredible talent for harmonies and for melodies.
Yeah, I think it's there. And I think, too, the effects that he's putting on when he's playing, he's putting a lot of resonance on there, and it gives his soloing that depth in parts so bluesy and soulful. You just feel like, wow, this guy's really, really tugging at something in my heartstrings. Here and there. And I also want to talk about the Sausage demo version, because this was a polished Primus tune going into the studio to record Frizzle Fry. And you've heard this track on the Sausage demo. And please go back and listen to it, because it's so interesting. And I'll plop some in here.
Fact is, Jesus doesn't make much sense when Sam said, "This guy is pretty bizarre, Gus."
It's just a mite faster tempo on the demo, but Jay Lane is just grooving, and he kills that hi-hat during the bluesy middle part. And I want to ask him about this someday. Todd Huth, I want to say, Todd, how did you not face any charges when you totally destroyed the blues with one guitar solo? He just tore that genre down in 1 minute of soloing on the guitar, because how fluid he's moving along those pentatonic scales and bending those notes. I love his solo on the demo version. That's the one that warms my heart. It's so interesting because you have these two different lineups, but you have these two wonderful recordings of the same track that evoke different feelings and have totally different grooves to them. You probably have the drop on this. This is one that spanned beyond Primus. I believe the Fraud Brigade performed Harold here and there.
Yes. So speaking about the live history, first we have the Sausage demo version with Todd Huth, which, as you mentioned, is a faster tempo and different guitar work. And then we have the Frizzle Fry version, which was really, really heavy rotation since the get-go at Primus shows. And then we have a change of gear with Brain during the Brown album and the Antipop era. During the Ozfest in particular, Herald of the Rocks was pretty much a metal track at that point, given the way that they were performing it. Then, as you mentioned, we have a Frog Brigade version. As I told you that the Groundhog's Day version of the Frog Brigade is radically different to the original, but in the case of Herald of the Rocks, it's fairly similar to the Frizzle Fry version. The only notable differences are, of course, that Lair is not there. So what you have are Todd Hood and Enor bringing their own style to the table for the track. Particularly a special thing about the Frog Brigade version is the synth that you can hear on the chorus. That's something pretty unique for that version. After that, we go back to Primus, and at that point, with Fromage and Hallucinogenetics, Herald of the Rocks underwent yet another transformation, because I think it was one of the trippiest songs of those tours. Certainly, the bridge where each band member displayed their skills the most throughout the setlist. And then we have the versions with Jay Lane. You mentioned how his hi-hat work on the track, and I agree with you completely. It's a really unique version as well. And then we're back to the original lineup performing Herald of the Rocks once more, fairly similar to the Frizzle Fry version, but still with a little improv. On a side note, I would like to mention something really peculiar. I'm sure you're familiar with the Stanford University radio performance that took place on 1989.
Absolutely. That is a great video.
Yeah. Something that is really amazing about that performance is that when Lair is playing his solo, for a brief moment, the camera focuses on Les, and you can see this really expressive look on his face, full of amazement at how Larry is performing the solo. I don't think we see that very often when they are performing, something so mind-blowing that you can see the look on Les's face. And that's something that you can see on this video, Stanford University 1989. Les blown away by Larry.
At this point, they've been playing together for over 30 years, so I guess you can surprise one another after 30 years, but at the time of that video, they'd been together not too long, so I guess at that point, you certainly could be somewhat surprised by something that your bandmate does during a performance, and that's really cool. You mentioned the Antipop version, the Antipop era and Brown Album era versions, and I had listened to a couple of those before we recorded today, and those are so interesting because those move with Brain, they move at breakneck pace.
Yes.
I mean, it's like, I don't know if they were just like, well, we got to get, we're running out of time, we got to get the hell out of here, so let's boom, 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 let's do it, and up the tempo, or if they just wanted to push it that fast as a part of the era or what. Those are really interesting performances. So if you have access, go back and listen to those, and it's not a bad thing. It's just, it's different, and it just flies right by. I called it a sprawling track, and those are the versions I'm used to, where about album speed, and then they can flesh out that slower middle part. And Tim really dials it down, especially these days, to let Larry do his thing.
We can't forget a really historic performance of Harold. I'm talking about Woodstock 94, with Jerry Cantrell guest appearing on the song.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
And for me, the best thing about the whole guest appearance is that after his tremendous guitar solo, you can hear Lair say, well, what am I supposed to do now?
Oh, that Larry. He's always had a great sense of humor. And all these things we're talking about, I mean, this is the magic of YouTube and the internet. These things are all out there, so you just go experience them. We'll throw up some links, of course, but this track that's gotten so much play, so many subtle differences and not so subtle differences throughout the years, which keeps it fresh, especially for guys like us who listen to endless versions of live shows. So thank you, Primus, for keeping it fresh for us. So let's talk about the track itself and the music. We have a lot of sections. This is a tune with many different things going on. And I think you noted this in a previous episode, that the well is on the demo.
Yes.
But it doesn't make it onto the album. Now, do you have any insight as to why that is?
It's actually on the Studio Demo 2 version, and then they removed it for the final release of Frizzle Fry. The only theory that comes to my mind is that perhaps they wanted to make it just a bit different to the Suck on This version.
Yeah, I wonder if that, like you said, it's on that album demo, so I am curious as to why they felt the need to drop it. If anybody's got any theories out there, send them on over. But I do wonder if they just wanted to get this thing off and running. So we have that narration section, which is fascinating in and of itself, because you have a pretty simple bass line, some guitar texturing, and those drums are grooving. But we're mostly listening to the narration because this is Les Claypool telling us a story, and this is what makes this so uniquely Primus to me, is we have this wonderful instrumentation, but I'm listening to the guy telling the story with all the people with funny names, you know? And then all of a sudden there's this musical chorus with that chromatic descending riff. Dun, dun, dun. It almost kind of interrupts the story, and I'm thinking, hey, wait a minute, tell me more. You know, and then we get back into the narration, and then we have that really funky ass breakdown with some lead bass fills, and that leads into our bluesy midsection with a guitar solo and the nice semi-walking bass line going on. And there's so much space to fill that these guys, that part, and I'm going to talk about the bluesy midsection until I keel over, because it's just so wonderful. There's so much space for Larry to do his guitar soloing, but then Les is doing a fairly simple bass line, but it doesn't get lost because it's not boring. And when I'm humming Herald of the Rocks, as I often do, especially because I went back and studied the song a bit, I often find myself just humming that bass line in that midsection. It's so fun to follow along. Much easier, I guess, to hum than a guitar solo, too, so that helps. You know? Because it's hard to hum and go, you can't hum that. And then we're back to the narration. We get the rest of the story, and then we get another part with different instrumentation around that really poetic, so in the end, Swamper and Greenie, and so on, which is something people love to recite. And then what's great is we get the record slowing down, like record sounds, and then we're back. It's revived all of a sudden, and it's though we're back to the front of it with the reprise of To Defy. Really interesting ending to this tune too.
I think the ending of the track is like a cartoon.
That's a great. You're absolutely right. That ending is so cartoony. It's like the end of a Warner Brothers episode. Or something.
Exactly.
Yeah, that cartooniness, and we've hinted at it here and there. You know, it pops up in Too Many Puppies a little bit. It pops up in Mr. Know-It-All. It pops up in our interlude tracks, and definitely Pudding Time can be considered cartoony. And then we have this cartoony end, which is so funny. And that's why, to me, like, it's a perfect album closer, because they had this little piece to it. So it is strange to hear that when it's ending the opening song live. Is this it? Are they done? What? It's only 7:30.
For me, the most exciting thing about Herald of the Rocks live is the anticipation to what Les is going to do with his bass before the breakdown, because he does something different every single performance.
Yes, absolutely. Those fills, those are made for him to improvise, and he can do whatever's tickling his fancy that day. He's got those bars to do it with, which is wonderful. And we've said this about so many Primus tracks. This one seems so simple as far as the bass line goes, and it generally is fairly simple. This is one that a bass player could probably pick up pretty easily. But we get these parts where he gets to show off. And those are probably really hard to replicate. Or the guitar parts, credited to Todd Huth, they're relatively simple, but then go ahead, try to play that beautiful guitar solo, So that's what makes it so great, because it's relatively simple music going during the narration, but it's never as easy or simple as it seems. So there's some layers to it that are really, really fun to peel back on. And it's the same, too, when they go into Defy, because it's not a complete reprise of that track. We're getting the melody line from the guitar and the bass line, but Tim is pounding those toms, and he's not keeping the 2 and the 4 on the snare, so it sounds completely off kilter. And Larry's added some more resonance to his guitar, so it's really a tripped out take on that. And I can only imagine that came from a studio jam, I guess. Or that had to be the vision. We're going to close with this reprise, so let's do it in this way.
A little did they know that a few years down the line, that track would serve as the perfect seek to the encore number during Hallucinogenetics, because when they finished that song, Les would leave his bass on loop, and you would get a ton of feedback until they returned to the stage for the encore song. I think that those noises sort of set a really cool atmosphere before they come back on stage.
He was really in love with the looping stuff, which, and, sometimes awesome, sometimes just fine, sometimes you might question it. But that was a really effective use of it to bridge the end of the Frizzle Fry set with coming back out for an encore. Absolutely. I have a question about that too, because on the album it fades out. So these tracks that fade out, these Primus tracks, and the answer I want is, they go on for another 5 minutes. On tape, and you're going to get those in the box set 30 years from now. But I really do wonder how long they go on the original studio tape and where they made that decision fade out here. So I'm curious, what are we missing for To Defy? How long is that actual take? And I'm going to ask that question again, especially when we get to something, say, American Life, and that just fiery section that closes that tune and fades out on the album. How much more of that is there, and where can I hear it?
Oh yes,
that's because it's wonderful. I do wonder about that, and you've said this before, Frankie. There really aren't that many outtakes, is what we've been told. But these tapes have to be somewhere.
Definitely. I have a soft spot for the loops and for the noodling between each track, because I think they set an atmosphere and they create a lot of anticipation during the Denver shows. I'm not sure if it was the first or the second night, but there was a guy next to me. His name is Nate. When in one of the moments when Les was noodling on the bass before a track, he said, "Wow, where are they taking us?" I thought, that is a spot-on comment. When Les is looping or he's noodling, you have no idea where he's going to take you. Because, those loops really don't anticipate any track at all. When he's done with that, the next song could be anything.
That's a great point. And Nate, if you're listening, I hope they took you to a safe place. I hope you're alive and well. Sometimes they sound so sinister. I'm not certain. So that's a great point. That they can do something so unexpected is so satisfying, because you do wonder where it's going to go next. And that really does build that bridge from one track to the next. Those of us who have really trained our ears over the years, if you hear a little hint of something, you probably know what's coming. So that makes it even more fun. It's like a trivia question. What is, that sounds like, or what, I think he's going to play X, whatever's happening. So, and it's also really helps cover an instrument change. Because then if he's doing that on the 4 and then all of a sudden comes out with the upright or the 6, one of the 6s, first of all, people are going to lose their minds. And second of all, you get to, okay, what's it going to be? So you can really get to play around with that.
Have you seen the performance of Harold of the Rocks in Sydney back in 2011?
I don't remember that one.
This show is professionally recorded and it's available on YouTube. You just have to search for Moshcam Primus Sydney 2011.
Oh, the Moshcam. Okay, sure.
Yeah.
I've watched this one, yeah.
There's a hilarious performance of Harold of the Rocks on that show because, Primus are 3 professionals and they are basically the only people on earth who can play their songs the way they do. But they can make mistakes every now and then. This performance is really funny because they make a mistake. They make 2 mistakes on Harold of the Rocks, and the way that Les reacts to the mistakes is hilarious. On the first mistake, I think that Jay comes in too early before a breakdown, and everything stops. And Les says, "We're shitting our pants here." And then they continue the track, and then they make another mistake further. Once again, they stop everything, and you can hear Les saying, "What the fuck, man? We wrote this song."
Well, they're not perfect, and that's part of the allure too. So that's so funny, and just to be able to weather it that way, and own it like that. That's so great. It's like, we wrote this. I love that. We wrote this song. Why are we? And it's not taking pleasure in their mistakes. It's just, oh man, yeah, these guys are human, So
human after all.
Exactly. Yes. And then you every once in a while, and I think I've heard it most commonly. He, Les in particular, when he's playing the intro to Over the Electric Grapevine, he'll mess it up from time to time or start on the wrong fret. And there's one show where he starts it and he's at least one step too high, I think, on the scale. And he goes, I fucked it up. And he pauses for a second. He starts playing it again. And then 2 seconds later, he goes, I fucked it up again. You can have an off night when you're on stage. That's for sure. It's
a really peculiar thing because Les runs the show. So if he makes a mistake, he is his own critic and he has his own standard. But when it's other people who make the mistake, I think that's a different story. I recall a video I saw on YouTube where he was playing the Wamola with Jay, and suddenly he stops playing. He turns to look at Jay and he tells him, Jay, can you play something with a beat? And and then Jay stops and he tries to start playing again, and Les leans to the microphone again and he tells him, never mind, play the beat of the song that we were doing before. And it kind of reminds me of how James Brown used to fine his musicians if they made mistakes live. They say that in the beginning his fines were like around $5 or $10, but they went up dramatically when they started playing larger shows, and he could charge between $50 or $100 per mistake. Something that resonates with me is I had a conversation with Paolo Baldi the last year. I had 2 conversations with him the last year, and in one of them I asked him about Precipitation. I said, Paolo, that song, what you have to do on drums for that track, it works perfectly for the song, but at the same time, it's incredibly repetitive. Is it hard for you as a drummer to stick to that beat for 10 minutes? And he told me that it was kind of hard because every now and then, when they played Precipitation, he would start doing some fills or he tried to change things up a bit. And he said that on one occasion, Les told him, Paulo, you're getting a little fancy with that kick drum.
Oh, wow.
And he told me, that's why he's the Colonel.
Yeah, for those of you not familiar, Paulo is the drummer, or was the drummer for the Fancy Band, and is the live drummer for Claypool, Lennon, Delirium. Yeah. So his little flourishes he was adding.
They were not welcome at all.
Yeah, they were nixed. I didn't know that story about James Brown either. It's
crazy, right?
That is probably beyond what Les Claypool is doing, but that's really extreme to be fining your musicians if they make a mistake. If we find ourselves every mistake we made on this podcast, we wouldn't be here right now. I'll put it that way. I think that speaks to the vision. This is a Les Claypool driven thing. There's no secret there. He writes the lyrics. He's the main song guy. It's not completely his vision, but when they have a vision, they're going to stick to it. And that's fascinating because there is room for improvisation here and there. There is room to embellish and put in flourishes here and there. But I guess there's a line somewhere, and certain things have to be in a certain way.
And Herb said that when you're playing with Les Claypool, you have to meet him somewhere. There is no compromising. He's not going to. I think what he meant to say is that he's not going to adapt to what you're doing. You have to be up to his standard. I think that's a great thing. I think every single musician who's played with Les Claypool has reached their highest potential because of him.
A lot of the folks in the Grapevine book have said something similar, whether it's Mike Dillon or Skerrick or whoever, that he pushes them to take that next step, and that's
he
really,
pushes hard.
Really And he doesn't do it in an authoritarian way, it seems, because otherwise those guys wouldn't play with him, which is, so good. He's doing it in a diplomatic way.
I met Mike Dillon the last year, and I asked him about the tour with the Funky Band when they were playing in 2009 to support that album. I don't know if you're aware of this, but they were playing Tela Hunginjit during that tour. But it's a tour where Les didn't have a guitar player on stage. So Mike Dillon actually had to play the opening riff of that track on the marimba. I asked him, when Les told you that you were going to have to play that, what was your reaction? And he told me that he was scared shitless.
Yeah, because that's one that people recognize. That one's been in the Les Claypool repertoire for quite some time. So if you mess it up, everybody knows. I think I would be scared shitless as well. I think that's a great description. It's funny because I talked about the mystique of this tune. We're barely talking about this tune, but it's funny because there's really there's not a lot, I should say, to dig up in the lyrics, because the lyrics are the story of the lyrics. It's all right there. You don't really have to do much to understand what's going on. But there are some things I want to point out that really stand out to me. He starts the story by building his crew to make the story go. And then, like I said, they have funny names. We've got Swamper, Greenie, Wendy-O, Stanley, Harold of the Rocks, and the narrator, who happens to be Snapdad. So he's building his crew as they go. He uses just these simple lines to launch into the musical chorus. His name is Harold. Off this riff goes. And then in the middle of that rockin' riff, he says, I said, okay, which is the most banal piece of dialogue you could ever have. I said, okay. It's nothing, but it turns into something so intense that the crowd can also yell along with. It's that simple and funny. Here's another entry into the Primus lexicon. We talked about the spelling of things like Southington Willoughby and whatnot. Rhinoceros. Rhinoceros. He says rhinoceros. Yes. So totally acceptable. It's the Primus lexicon. It's rhinoceros. That's how we say it.
Right up there with holograms.
Right? Yes, exactly. The holograms. This is their world, and we're learning their language. So rhinoceros is fun to drop on people because they don't know what you're saying. It's just you're putting the emphasis elsewhere.
I think it's also worthwhile pointing out to anyone who might not be aware of this, but Gus is not an additional character. Les and his friend used to call Gus each other at work all the time.
Right. These two guys got into the habit of calling everybody Gus. And there are, I think it might be in the book or somewhere else in some interview I read that somebody said, yeah, those were the years where Les was calling everybody Gus. And they didn't really say it in a way that engendered fuzzy nostalgia. I think it was probably an annoying thing for a lot of people.
Stan Hearn is credited on the album's liner notes as the voice saying, "This guy's pretty bizarre, Gus." If you look up Stan Hearn, you'll get a result for Discogs, and it seems like his only contribution to the world of music is that dialogue on Frizzle Fry.
And that goes right back to, Les Claypool likes to bring his friends in, and I believe Stan's the guy he was working with, because Stan got to say this guy's pretty bizarre.
Yeah.
So these guys, so he brought in Stan, said, say your line for this song. I love that. It's just one little thing. Let's do it. That's a really fun little nugget there. This is obviously because he's introduced this tune live many a time with, crack cocaine's a bad thing, or I had some friends that went down this road.
I'm going to recite a particular introduction that he made live, which I think sums up the back history perfectly. Mm-hmm. He said, "Many years ago, one of my very good friends who I used to hang with just about every single day, all of a sudden, I didn't see him very often. And I thought, well, I'm busy. He's busy. That's the kind of way that it goes with friends sometimes. Well, every Sunday, we used to go to this place in Berkeley called Napoleon's Bakery. And so he showed up there with some individual who was a little bit strange. He looked really gaunt, and he was very thin. And he said that he had been fasting. I said, okay. In actuality, he was strung out on crack cocaine."
Don't take my word for it. Take the author's word for it, right? And so we know that's what it's about. And the coolest part is he doesn't even use those terms in the tune. but we get the slang, right? It's Harold of the Rocks. I wonder what those could be. And then in the tune, Harold tells the narrator, I'm lit up like an old Christmas tree. I think we understand what lit up means in that context. And at the very end of the tune, he says, Swamper and Greenie finally succumb to the ways of Harold. Never uses the term crack cocaine in the tune, but we can figure it out. And the other thing I wanted to point out is the musical structure of their narration part. It allows so much space to work out the cadence of those lyrics. And there is a bit of a cadence. Like, there's not much meter going on. I just don't see that in there, but there is a bit of a cadence to it, you know? And it does move along pretty well, but he's got so much space to tell his story. You know, this is not a pop song by any stretch. But it is so popular with the Primus crowd, which is what gets me. And we get the elongated I, which builds that anticipation for the continuation of the story after our bluesy interlude. And there are a lot of musical stops for line delivery. We've talked about a few of them, but it highlights the importance of the line, I guess. But I really think it just gives us more in the crowd, more to yell along with, so we can participate.
There's a particular show which is really hilarious from Tour de Fromage, where during the narration part, Les is playing the bass line for the narration, but then somebody takes a photograph of him and he goes off into this monologue about why flash photography sucks and why they are ruining the visuals on the background with the flash. And then there's a guy who takes another photograph with flash while he's giving that speech. So he gets really mad and he tells him to leave the theater, and like this this whole really pissed off monologue. And then instead of returning to the narration, he finishes the song really quickly. So he goes like, so in the end, Swamper and Greenie finally come to whisper, what a couple of dumb shits. And they like he ran out of time to do the narration properly because of the monologue.
Oh, that's great, but he still fit it into the space.
Yes.
Oh, that's fantastic. I need to find that one. That's good. And I actually wanted to talk about that part, that narration at the very end, because he says this is this beautiful poetic narration around this instrumentation that tells us the moral of the story. He even delivers it in that kind of voice. On the album, he says, so in the end, his voice is kind of soft there, So in the end, Swamper and Greenie finally succumbed to the ways of Harold. And in doing so, each gave just a little bit of his soul away.
Soul away.
There it is. Yeah, nice. So there's that. It's poetic. It flows. Nice phrase. And then he drops out of that and gives us that colloquialism, lower class terminology, if you want to say that. And he's, what a couple of dumb shits. So there's it's a beautiful dichotomy there. Just what they build with that little bit of instrumentation, and so in the end, and that delivery, and then the dismissive, what a couple of dumb shits. So there's really some good stuff going on there at the end. And then we get that final descending riff and our cartoony ending, or our Tiny Toons Adventures, or whatever you want to call it. I said this about a couple other tracks. This is a strange track, and it's sprawling and humongous, but it's so unique to this band. I can't deny its power.
There's something really peculiar about the lyrics, because when Les recalls his encounter with this person, he recalls how he said, I'd like to thank you once again for letting me hang with y'all across the bay. Mm-hmm. When I look back at that night, I get a warm spot across my heart. For Les to mention that in the lyrics of the song, to immortalize that conversation, I think it's because those words really got to him. Like, I think they moved him in some way. And that's a very peculiar thing about Les. Primus doesn't have any particularly emotional track. They don't have a moving track per se. But I think that regardless of that, Les is a really warm person, even though he might not express something back of equal magnitude with words. I think that he really feels what people tell him, and he's moved by words more than people imagine. I say this from personal experience because every time that I've had the privilege of meeting Les in person, I always tell him the same thing. I say, Les, your music means the world to me. He always responds to that with a pat on my arm, or a smile on his face. So I think that Les is a person who can be moved by words very deeply, and that is reflective on this song. I think that what this guy told him really resonated with him.
Frankie, you're going deep, man. My idea, I just thought, Les thought it was ironic that this crack dealer was so friendly, but you're taking it way. You've got the insight, man. That's excellent. Well, just by sharing that, man, like those are all our interpretations. We all have these different interpretations. That's what's beautiful about the music, and it's what's great about hearing everybody's connection to it. Like my big take around Harold, it's a Primus all-timer. And I've said it's a big sprawling track. It's an enchanting track. It is absolutely a Primus track. And that's the thing for me. It defines, I think this is probably the track I would use to define this band. Not the one I would try to use to get people into this band. There's a huge difference. But I think it's the one that defines them. If that makes any sense. And I will add this, one little personal connection. I used to use that cartoony ending, that last 20 seconds or so, way back when, we had the PC in our house when I was a kid and we were running, I don't know, Windows 3.1 or Windows 95. When you went to shut down the computer, I clipped that sound or that segment of the cartoony music, and that would play every time you shut down the computer. And my dad did not appreciate having to wait 20 seconds for that to play, and then the shutdown process, and then it's saying it is now safe to turn off your PC. So he eventually, it didn't take too long. He said, "Get that off of there." So, well, I think you gave it to us with your in-depth discussion of it. But what's your overall take of this track?
My overall take is that Harold is an absolute tour de force in every sense. The studio cut is phenomenal, but the live performances is where it's at. Lur really shines during those performances. It's really hard not to focus on what Les is doing during a live performance. Most of the time, I'm just looking at him, but Harold of the Rocks is one of those tracks where if I am on the Les side of the stage, I turn my head to look at Larry the entire performance. I think he totally steals the show with his guitar work on the breakdown. As for the musical structure, as you said, it isn't a conventional song by any means. It's absolutely unique and original. So I guess I'll repeat what I said at the beginning. Harold of the Rocks is the centerpiece of Frizzle Fry, and it's an undisputable Primus classic.
And Harold, it's time for rehab because you've been tracked. And I think Frankie is as excited as I am to tell you that we are going to take a little detour before we set out to sea for 1991's Sailing the Seas of Cheese, which of course is up next in the queue. We're going to take one, maybe two more last looks at the early days of Primus and Primate with some very special guests. Get ready for that because you're going to say, what? How? I can't believe this. How did these schmoes? Yeah, I'm saying the same thing right now, okay? I'm sitting in a chair, and I'm basically strapped in because I didn't think this was going to happen either. So be ready for those. We will definitely get to Sailing the Seas of Cheese, don't you worry. I'm very excited to talk about that album.
But first, we're going to blow your minds.
We got to do that first. And then if you survive, folks, thanks for listening. Join us over on Instagram and Twitter. Leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. We're having a great time. And share with us. I'm going to put up a prompt. What's your go-to track on Frizzle Fry? I would love to know. Maybe I'll put up a poll. I think you can do polls on Instagram.
But please don't say it's Harold's On the Rocks.
That will not be an option. And if you somehow sneak that in there, it will be removed at once. Thank you for that, Frank, for bringing it full circle. That's all we've got today, folks. Later days.
Willie Mays.